There is a quiet mystery surrounding the INFJ personality type. In conversations, they speak gently, thoughtfully, and often with deep emotional undercurrents. Yet, many people walk away confused, wondering what the INFJ really meant. This is one of the most searched questions in personality psychology circles. Why are INFJs so hard to understand? To decode INFJ communication, you have to understand how the INFJ mind works. The INFJ personality type, often called the advocate or counselor in the Myers-Briggs type indicator system, processes the world through intuition, emotional insight, and layered meaning. Their words are rarely just words. They are symbols, signals, and emotional translations of something much deeper. INFJs do not speak from the surface level of experience. They speak from patterns, impressions, and internal visions. When an INFJ talks, they are not simply describing what happened. They are describing what it meant, what it connects to, and what it might become. This intuitive communication style is one of the main reasons people struggle to decode INFJs. Most people communicate through concrete facts and direct statements. INFJs communicate through emotional nuance, metaphor, and implication. They often assume others can read between the lines the way they do. But not everyone operates with strong intuitive pattern recognition. This mismatch creates misunderstandings in relationships, friendships, and workplaces. One key reason INFJs are misunderstood is their dominant cognitive function, introverted intuition. This function focuses on abstract connections and future implications rather than immediate reality. INFJs often arrive at conclusions without being able to easily explain the step-by-step reasoning behind them. To others, it can seem like they jumped to an idea out of nowhere. But inside the INFJ mind, that idea is the result of thousands of subtle observations, emotional cues, and pattern analyses. Their brain is constantly scanning for meaning beneath behavior. They pick up on tone shifts, pauses in speech, body language inconsistencies, and emotional atmospheres. When they finally speak, they are responding to an entire invisible data set. This is why INFJ communication can feel mysterious or even cryptic. They are answering questions no one else realized were being asked. Another reason people cannot decode what INFJs say is their deep emotional intelligence combined with emotional privacy. INFJs are highly empathetic personality types. They can sense how others feel with remarkable accuracy. However, they do not reveal their own emotions as easily. In conversations, INFJs often focus on understanding the other person rather than being understood themselves. They ask thoughtful questions, reflect feelings back, and offer insight. But when the topic turns to their inner world, they become selective. They share in layers, testing emotional safety before going deeper. Because of this, their words may sound calm and composed while their internal emotional experience is intense and complex. People hear the surface message but miss the emotional depth underneath. This creates the impression that INFJs are vague, when in reality they are simply cautious about emotional exposure. INFJs also tend to communicate indirectly when dealing with conflict. As a conflict-avoidant personality type, they dislike harsh confrontation. Instead of bluntly stating a problem, they may hint at it, soften it, or frame it philosophically. They might say, "I've just been thinking a lot about balance in relationships," when they actually mean, "I feel emotionally drained and unappreciated." To the INFJ, this feels clear. To others, it feels confusing. This indirect communication style is a major reason INFJs feel misunderstood in relationships. They believe they have expressed themselves honestly, but the listener did not recognize the emotional code embedded in their words. Another layer of complexity comes from the INFJ tendency towards symbolic language. They often speak in metaphors, analogies, and big-picture reflections. Instead of saying, "I'm overwhelmed," an INFJ might say, "It feels like my mind has too many tabs open and none of them are loading properly." This poetic communication style resonates deeply with some personality types but leaves others puzzled. INFJs are also future-oriented thinkers. When they talk about a present situation, they are often really talking about where it is heading. They might express concern that seems disproportionate to the current issue. Others think they are overthinking. But INFJs are reacting to a projected emotional trajectory they can already see forming. This intuitive forecasting is part of why INFJs seem intense or overly serious in conversations. They are not just talking about now. They are talking about what now becomes later. Silence is another part of INFJ communication that confuses people. INFJs need processing time. When asked an emotional or meaningful question, they may pause for a long moment. During that silence, they are scanning their inner landscape, searching for the most accurate and honest expression. To fast-paced communicators, this pause feels awkward or evasive. To INFJs, it is respect for truth. Because INFJs value authenticity, they do not like giving quick, shallow answers. They would rather say nothing than say something that does not fully represent their internal reality. This makes their communication slower but more intentional. INFJs are also highly context-sensitive. What they say depends heavily on who they are speaking to and how emotionally safe they feel. With a stranger, an INFJ might sound polite, reserved, and somewhat generic. With a trusted friend, the same INFJ becomes profound, emotionally open, and philosophically rich. This shifting communication style can make it seem like the INFJ is inconsistent or hard to pin down. In truth, they are adapting their level of depth to the emotional environment. They are constantly asking, often unconsciously, is it safe to say what I really mean here? One of the biggest misunderstandings about INFJs is that they are secretive. In reality, they are selective. They want to be deeply understood, but only by people who have earned that level of access. So their words are often layered, with deeper meanings reserved for those who truly listen. To decode INFJs, you must listen beyond the literal sentence. Pay attention to tone, pacing, emotional shifts, and recurring themes. INFJs often circle around a topic before stating it directly. They are feeling their way toward clarity as they speak. Another reason people struggle to understand INFJs is that INFJs themselves sometimes struggle to translate their inner world into language. Their thoughts come as images, impressions, and emotional blends. Turning that into linear sentences can feel like compressing a symphony into a ringtone. Something always gets lost. This is why INFJs may say, I don't know how to. INFJs also assume others notice the same subtle cues they do. When someone's behavior changes slightly, the INFJ may respond to that shift without explaining what they noticed. The other person, unaware of the change, feels blindsided by the INFJ's reaction. This creates the classic dynamic where INFJs feel others are emotionally oblivious, and others feel INFJs are overreacting. In reality, both are operating with different perceptual filters. Understanding INFJ communication style requires patience, emotional awareness, and curiosity. Instead of taking their words at face value, it helps to gently ask follow-up questions like, can you tell me more about what you mean? Or, how did that make you feel? INFJs often open up beautifully when they sense genuine interest. It also helps to create a calm, non-judgmental space. INFJs are extremely sensitive to criticism and emotional dismissal. If they feel rushed, mocked, or misunderstood, they retreat into emotional privacy. But when they feel heard, their communication becomes incredibly clear, deep, and insightful. At their best, INFJs are some of the most profound communicators in personality psychology. They can articulate emotional truths others feel but cannot name. They can bridge logic and empathy, vision and reality. But accessing that depth requires slowing down and listening with more than just your ears. Decoding what INFJs say is less about intellectual analysis and more about emotional attunement. It is about sensing the meaning behind the meaning. And perhaps the real reason people cannot decode INFJs is this: INFJs are not speaking only to be understood. They are speaking to be felt. The emotional subtext INFJs never say out loud. One of the deepest reasons people struggle to understand INFJs is that much of their communication happens beneath language. INFJs are masters of emotional subtext. While most people communicate content, INFJs communicate context, energy, and emotional undercurrents. When an INFJ says, I'm fine, it rarely means only that. It might mean, I'm processing something and I don't yet feel safe explaining it. Or, I don't want to burden you. Or even, I'm disappointed but I don't know how to express it without causing distance. The words are simple. The emotional meaning is layered. This is not manipulation. It is emotional self-protection mixed with deep consideration for others. INFJs are highly sensitive to emotional atmospheres. They do not like introducing tension abruptly. So they soften their truth, hoping the other person will sense the nuance. Often, the other person does not. INFJs in relationships, why partners feel confused. Romantic relationships are where INFJ communication becomes most misunderstood. INFJs crave deep emotional intimacy, but they rarely demand it directly. Instead, they drop emotional breadcrumbs, subtle hints, philosophical reflections, gentle shifts in tone. They might talk about wanting deeper connection in general when what they really mean is, I want to feel closer to you. They may discuss emotional presence as a concept rather than saying, I feel alone sometimes. Their partner hears an abstract idea. The INFJ is expressing a personal emotional need. This gap leads to one of the most common INFJ relationship problems, feeling unseen while appearing calm. On the outside, the INFJ seems patient, thoughtful, and understanding. Inside, they are quietly hoping their partner will notice the emotional signals hidden in their words. Because INFJs are natural emotional caretakers, they often overfunction in relationships. They listen deeply, validate feelings, and anticipate needs. But when they speak about their own inner world, they do so indirectly. Over time, this imbalance creates emotional exhaustion. The partner may say, why didn't you tell me you felt this way? And the INFJ, genuinely confused, thinks, I did. I just didn't say it loudly. INFJ communication style in conflict. INFJs approach conflict like diplomats with fragile glass in their hands. They want resolution, but they also want to protect the emotional bond. As a result, they often communicate dissatisfaction through tone shifts, reduced enthusiasm, or reflective statements rather than direct confrontation. They might say, I've just been thinking a lot lately, or something feels a little off, but I can't fully name it yet. To them, this is an invitation to explore the issue together. To a more direct personality type, it sounds vague or passive. When pushed into direct confrontation, INFJs can surprise people. After long periods of quiet processing, they may suddenly express a fully formed conclusion, I don't think this dynamic is healthy for me. The other person feels blindsided, unaware that the INFJ has been internally analyzing the situation for weeks or months. This delayed clarity is tied to the INFJ cognitive function stack. Their introverted intuition gathers data slowly and deeply, forming insights over time. By the time they speak with certainty, the internal decision may already feel final. INFJs at work, why colleagues misread them. In professional environments, INFJ communication can be especially misunderstood. INFJs are strategic, future-oriented thinkers who often see long-term consequences others miss. When they raise concerns, they may do so in abstract or big-picture language. They might say, I'm not sure this aligns with the overall direction we're moving toward, instead of, this plan will cause problems in 3 months. Their communication focuses on vision and coherence rather than immediate logistics. More practical or fast-paced coworkers may interpret this as overthinking, negativity, or lack of decisiveness. In reality, the INFJ is trying to prevent future issues by addressing subtle misalignments now. INFJs also tend to hold back in group discussions until they have fully processed their thoughts. By the time they are ready to speak, the conversation may have moved on. This contributes to the stereotype that INFJs are quiet, hard to read, or disengaged at work, when in fact they are deeply engaged internally. When they do share, their input often sounds polished, holistic, and surprisingly insightful. But because it comes after long silence, others may not see the mental activity that led there. The INFJ paradox, deeply private, deeply expressive. One of the most confusing aspects of INFJ personality is that they can talk about profound emotional and philosophical topics while still hiding their most personal feelings. They might discuss the meaning of loneliness in society, emotional healing, or human nature with eloquence and depth. yet never directly say, "I feel lonely" or "I am hurting." This creates a strange illusion. People think they know the INFJ deeply because the conversation was deep. But they actually know the INFJ's insights, not their raw emotional reality. INFJs separate universal truth from personal vulnerability. Sharing ideas feels safe. Sharing unfiltered personal pain feels exposed. So their communication often lives in that middle space, intimate in theme, guarded in self-disclosure. Why INFJs feel misunderstood so often? Because of all these layers, INFJs frequently carry the quiet belief that no one truly understands them. They explain carefully. They choose words with intention. They try to be honest. Yet people still respond to only part of what they meant. Over time, this can lead INFJs to speak less about their inner world. Not because they have nothing to say, but because translating their internal landscape feels exhausting when it rarely lands the way they hoped. They may retreat into journaling, creative expression, or silent reflection. Many INFJs find writing easier than speaking because it allows them to refine their meaning without interruption. Spoken conversation moves too fast for the complexity they are trying to express. How to truly understand what an INFJ is saying. To understand INFJ communication, listening must become slower and more intuitive. It is not just about the sentence. It is about the emotional temperature, the pauses, the metaphors they choose, and what they do not say directly. When an INFJ speaks in generalities, gently ask if it connects to something personal. When they describe a concept with unusual intensity, there is often lived emotion behind it. When they say they are tired, they may be emotionally overwhelmed, not physically fatigued. The key is curiosity without pressure. INFJs open up when they feel invited, not interrogated. A simple, "I really want to understand what this is like for you," can unlock depths they rarely show. And perhaps most importantly, INFJs need reassurance that their emotions are not too much. Many of them grew up feeling different, intense, or overly sensitive. So they learn to compress their truth into quieter language. If you want to decode an INFJ, you must show them that their full emotional reality is welcome. Because underneath the careful words, the metaphors, and the thoughtful pauses, INFJs are not trying to be mysterious. They are trying to be accurate about feelings that most people never slow down enough to notice. The silence, the door slam, and the things INFJs decide without announcing. There comes a point in many INFJ relationships where the other person says, "I had no idea you were feeling this way." And the INFJ, calm but distant, responds with something like, "I've been feeling this for a long time." This moment is often connected to what personality psychology calls the INFJ door slam, one of the most searched INFJ topics online. The door slam describes a sudden emotional cutoff after prolonged internal processing. To outsiders, it feels abrupt and extreme. To the INFJ, it feels like the final step of a very long, very quiet journey. The reason this happens ties directly back to why people cannot decode what INFJs say. INFJs rarely announce every stage of their emotional disillusionment. At first, they communicate gently, then symbolically, then indirectly. They might bring up patterns in abstract ways, speak about emotional needs philosophically, or grow quieter and more reflective. Each of these is communication, but because it is subtle, it often goes unnoticed. Inside, the INFJ is running a constant emotional analysis. They are asking, is this healthy? Is this mutual? Is this sustainable long-term? Their introverted intuition is projecting forward, simulating possible futures based on present behavior. If the vision repeatedly leads to emotional pain or misalignment, the INFJ slowly begins to detach. By the time they finally say, "I can't do this anymore," the decision may feel sudden to others but settled to them. They are not reacting only to the latest incident. They are responding to an accumulated emotional pattern they have been quietly tracking for a long time. The tragedy of unspoken thresholds. One of the core reasons INFJ communication fails to land is that INFJs often have internal emotional thresholds they never clearly verbalize. They assume that if something hurts repeatedly, the other person will notice and adjust. When that doesn't happen, they feel unseen. They might think, if they really understood me, they would realize this is affecting me. But understanding requires information. And INFJs tend to provide that information in coded, softened, or generalized ways. This creates a painful loop. The INFJ believes they have communicated. The other person believes everything is mostly fine. Both feel confused. Both feel misunderstood. When the INFJ finally reaches their emotional limit, their tone may become unusually firm and detached. This is not a loss of care. It is a protective shift. They have concluded that continuing to explain would only drain them further. INFJ intuition versus overthinking. Another major reason people struggle to decode INFJs is the difference between intuition and overthinking. From the outside, INFJs appear to analyze everything deeply. They notice subtle shifts in mood, energy, and behavior. They draw connections between events separated by time. They speak about patterns that others cannot see. To more concrete thinkers, this looks like overanalysis or anxiety. But for INFJs, this is their natural cognitive process. Introverted intuition does not move step by step. It synthesizes large amounts of emotional and situational data into sudden insights. The problem is that INFJs often state the insight without walking others through the invisible data behind it. They might say, something about this doesn't feel right long term, without listing the 10 small behavioral cues that led them there. So people dismiss the conclusion because they cannot see the evidence. The INFJ, feeling invalidated, withdraws further into internal processing. Over time, this can make their communication even more compressed and symbolic. How different personality types hear INFJs. Understanding why INFJs are hard to decode also requires looking at personality differences. Not everyone listens the same way. Logical, task-oriented personality types often listen for actionable facts. When an INFJ speaks in emotional or abstract language, they may miss the emotional urgency behind it. They hear theory where the INFJ is expressing lived experience. Highly direct communicators may feel frustrated by what they see as vagueness. They prefer clear statements like, "This upset me," or "I need more support." INFJs, meanwhile, are trying to preserve emotional harmony while still being honest. So they soften and contextualize their message. Emotionally expressive types might understand the feeling but be confused by the INFJ's restraint. INFJs feel deeply but often present those feelings in a calm, measured way. The intensity is internal, not theatrical. Because of these differences, INFJs often feel like they are speaking one emotional language while others are hearing another. The weight of constant translation. Many INFJs grow up feeling like emotional interpreters. They understand others easily, but others struggle to understand them. Over time, this creates communication fatigue. They begin to wonder whether expressing themselves fully is worth the effort. They shorten explanations. They say, "It's okay," instead of describing the complex mix of disappointment and empathy they actually feel. They retreat into inner worlds rich with insight but rarely fully shared. This is why INFJs often connect strongly with art, music, literature, and symbolic storytelling. These mediums allow layered emotional truth without forcing everything into blunt, literal language. It feels closer to how their mind naturally works. When INFJs do feel understood. Despite all this, INFJs are not doomed to be misunderstood. When someone truly listens, not just to the words, but to the emotional atmosphere around them, INFJs become remarkably clear communicators. When they feel safe, they will explain their thought process step by step. They will reveal the small moments that shape their conclusions. They will say, "When this happened, I started to feel this, and over time it built into this bigger fear." Their communication becomes less symbolic and more personal. Safety turns mystery into clarity. What INFJs secretly wish people knew. If INFJs could attach subtitles to their conversations, they might read like this. "When I speak vaguely, I am trying to be gentle, not distant. When I pause, I am searching for the most honest version of my feelings. When I talk about patterns, I am trying to protect the future, not criticize the present. When I go quiet, something inside me is overwhelmed, not empty. When I finally pull away, it is after I have tried, in my own quiet ways, for a very long time." The core truth is simple but easy to miss. INFJs are not unclear because they lack depth. They are unclear because they have too much depth to fit easily into everyday conversation. To decode what INFJs say, you must listen with patience, emotional openness, and a willingness to explore meaning beyond the literal sentence. You must be curious about what feeling gave birth to the words. Because INFJ communication is not just about information. It is about inner landscapes, emotional histories, and quiet visions of what relationships and life could be at their most meaningful. And those things are never simple to translate. Emotional burnout, social disappearing, and the words INFJs never learn to use. At some point in an INFJ's life, communication stops being about expression and starts being about conservation. This is where many people become even more confused by the INFJ personality. They are no longer just hard to read. They seem to fade, withdraw, or emotionally disappear. This shift is often the result of INFJ emotional burnout. INFJs are known in personality psychology as emotional absorbers. Their strong empathy and emotional intelligence mean they constantly pick up on the moods, tensions, and unspoken feelings of the people around them. Even when no one is speaking, INFJs are still listening to energy, to subtle shifts, to what feels unsaid. Over time, this creates internal noise. Imagine having dozens of emotional radio stations playing softly in the background all day. Most INFJs don't even realize how overloaded they are until they hit a wall. When burnout sets in, their communication changes. They use fewer words. Their responses get shorter. Their tone becomes flatter, not because they don't care, but because their internal system is overwhelmed. They are trying to reduce input, not push people away. To others, this feels confusing and sometimes hurtful. You used to open up so much. Now you barely say anything. But for the INFJ, silence becomes a form of emotional recovery. Why INFJs suddenly go quiet? One of the most searched INFJ behaviors is social withdrawal. Friends, partners, and coworkers often ask why INFJs suddenly disappear or become distant. The answer lies in the difference between introversion and emotional overstimulation. INFJs are not just socially drained by interaction. They are emotionally saturated by it. If they've been supporting others, navigating complex group dynamics, or suppressing their own needs to maintain harmony, their inner world becomes crowded. When this happens, communication feels like effort instead of connection. Explaining their feelings requires energy they no longer have. So they default to, "I'm just tired," or "I've been busy." Even when the deeper truth is, "My emotional system is overloaded and I don't know how to reset yet." Again, the words are simple. The reality is complex. The guilt that silences INFJs. Another hidden layer behind INFJ communication struggles is guilt. INFJs often feel responsible for other people's emotions. If they sense someone might feel hurt, rejected, or misunderstood, they soften their message or withhold it entirely. They might not say, "I need space," because they worry it will sound like, "I don't care about you." They might not say, "That hurt me," because they fear making the other person feel bad. So they carry the discomfort quietly. Over time, this pattern teaches INFJs to compress their needs into smaller and smaller statements. Instead of saying, "I feel emotionally drained and need time alone to rebalance," they say, "I'll just rest tonight." Instead of, "I need more emotional reassurance," they say nothing and hope for change. This emotional self-minimizing makes their communication harder and harder to decode, because the real message is buried under layers of politeness and self-restraint. INFJs and the fear of being too much. Many INFJs grow up with the subtle feeling that their emotional depth is excessive. They feel things strongly, think deeply, and crave meaningful connection. But in fast-paced, surface-level environments, this intensity can be misunderstood. So INFJs learn to edit themselves. They tone down their insights. They shorten their explanations. They hide how deeply something affected them. They replace raw emotion with intellectual reflection. For example, instead of saying, "That really hurt me more than I expected," an INFJ might say, "It was just interesting to notice my reaction." It sounds analytical. But underneath is unspoken vulnerability. This habit of self-editing becomes so automatic that even INFJs sometimes lose track of what they truly feel versus what feels acceptable to express. When they do try to speak honestly, the words may come out tangled, overly abstract, or emotionally muted. From the outside, it seems unclear. From the inside, it feels like trying to pour an ocean through a straw. When INFJs finally say it directly. Here's the paradox: INFJs are capable of incredibly direct communication, but usually only after a long internal build-up. Once they feel emotionally safe or reach a personal breaking point, their words can become startlingly clear. They might say, calmly and precisely, "I've been feeling emotionally alone in this relationship," or "I need more mutual effort, not just understanding." People are often shocked by this clarity. "Why didn't you say that sooner?" But to the INFJ, they were saying it through hints, tone, reduced energy, philosophical comments, and emotional shifts. They just weren't saying it in bold, literal sentences. This difference in communication style is at the heart of why people cannot decode what INFJs say. INFJs assume emotional awareness fills in the gaps. Others assume words contain the whole message. How INFJs can learn to be more understood. While much of the misunderstanding comes from others not recognizing INFJ nuance, INFJs themselves can grow in how they communicate. Not by becoming less deep, but by becoming more explicit. This means learning to attach clear emotional labels to their experiences. Saying, "I feel hurt," instead of, "That was a strange interaction." Saying, "I need reassurance," instead of, "I've been thinking a lot about connection lately." For INFJs, this can feel uncomfortable and overly blunt at first. It feels like removing the poetry from their language. But clarity does not erase depth. It simply gives others a doorway into it. When INFJs pair their natural insight with direct emotional language, their communication becomes powerful instead of puzzling. The core truth behind INFJ communication. At the center of all this is one quiet truth: INFJs are not trying to be mysterious. They are trying to be careful with feelings, with relationships, with the invisible emotional threads that connect people. They speak in layers because they experience life in layers. They soften their words because they feel the emotional weight of impact. They go quiet because their inner world gets too loud. To decode what INFJs say, you must understand that their communication is not just verbal. It is energetic, emotional, intuitive, and symbolic all at once. They are not hiding meaning. They are protecting meaning that feels too important to throw around carelessly. And when someone finally listens with patience, emotional presence, and genuine curiosity, the INFJ does not feel hard to understand at all. They feel like one of the clearest, most insightful voices you will ever hear. INFJs in friendships, family, and everyday conversations. It is one thing to misunderstand an INFJ in romance or conflict. It is another to miss what they are saying in everyday life. Because INFJ communication is layered, even their casual conversations often carry more meaning than people realize. In friendships, INFJs are often the emotional anchors. They remember the important details, notice subtle mood changes, and check in when something feels off. They may send a message that says, "Just thinking of you today," when what they really mean is, "You seemed a little quieter last time and I want to make sure you're okay." Their care is quiet but intentional. The problem is that INFJs rarely ask for the same level of attention in return. They do not easily say, "I need you to check in on me too." Instead, they assume emotional reciprocity will happen naturally. When it does not, they feel a silent imbalance growing. They might start speaking less in group chats, sharing fewer personal updates, or declining invitations more often. To friends, it may look like the INFJ is drifting away for no reason. But internally, the INFJ is feeling emotionally undernourished and unsure how to say it without sounding needy. So they say nothing. Family dynamics and the old soul effect. In families, INFJs are often labeled as the old soul, the peacemaker, or the quiet observer. From a young age, they tend to notice emotional tensions that others ignore. They may become mediators between family members, offering understanding to everyone while privately carrying the emotional weight. Because they appear mature and composed, adults may assume they are less affected by family stress. but INFJs internalize deeply. They may grow up learning to manage their emotions alone, expressing them through journaling, music, or imagination rather than direct conversation. As adults, this can translate into difficulty expressing needs with family. They might visit, listen, support, and adapt, while leaving their own inner struggles unspoken. When they do try to explain something personal, they may default to abstract language like, "I've just been reflecting on life a lot," instead of saying, "I've been feeling lost lately." Family members may miss the emotional signal entirely, responding with practical advice instead of emotional presence. The INFJ walks away feeling unseen, even in familiar spaces. Everyday conversations, depth in disguise. Even small talk with an INFJ is rarely just small talk. When they ask, "How have you really been?" they are not being polite. They are opening an emotional door. When they comment on a movie, a book, or a random life event, they are often referencing a deeper theme about identity, purpose, or connection. They may say, "That story was interesting. It really showed how people just want to feel understood," when they are quietly expressing their own longing to be understood. But because the comment is framed around something external, others respond at surface level. "Yeah, it was a good movie." The INFJ nods, feeling the familiar distance between what was said and what was meant. This repeated experience teaches INFJs to keep more of their reflections inside, not because they lack thoughts, but because sharing them without resonance feels lonely. How to build communication bridges with an INFJ. Understanding INFJ communication in daily life is about slowing down and leaning in. When they make a reflective comment, ask a gentle follow-up. When they go quiet, check in without pressure. When they share something small, treat it like something meaningful, because to them, it probably is. INFJs open up in environments where emotional nuance is welcomed, not rushed. They do not need dramatic reactions. They need presence, curiosity, and emotional steadiness. Saying things like, "I want to understand what that's like for you," or, "It sounds like that mattered more than you're letting on," can help them feel safe enough to go deeper. And when they do go deeper, listen without immediately fixing or reframing. INFJs often just want their internal reality acknowledged. Feeling understood is more important than being advised. Why decoding INFJs is ultimately about emotional literacy. At its core, the difficulty in understanding INFJs is not about complicated language. It is about emotional literacy. INFJs speak a dialect of feeling, pattern, and implication. They assume others are tracking emotional meaning alongside words. Many people are not used to listening that way. But when someone learns to tune into subtext, emotional shifts, and intuitive hints, INFJs stop seeming cryptic. Their communication reveals itself as careful, layered, and deeply sincere. They are not withholding truth. They are offering it in a form that requires presence to receive. INFJs live in a world of meanings beneath meanings. They notice the emotional weather, the trajectory of relationships, the quiet turning points others overlook. When they speak, they are trying to translate that invisible world into language gentle enough not to harm and honest enough not to betray themselves. Sometimes the translation comes out poetic, sometimes indirect, sometimes frustratingly subtle. But always, underneath it, is a simple desire to connect in a way that feels real, safe, and deeply human. And when someone finally says, "I think I understand what you're really trying to say," an INFJ does not feel exposed. They feel relieved.